First of all, I would like to invite Professor Eugenia the Director of Teaching and Learning Center, to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Marcia Devlin.
Thank you, Grace. Once again, welcome to Lingnan. If you are from other university institute, so Lingnan is a very small place, so you shouldn't get lost. We are very pleased to have Marcia Devlin coming all the way from Australia, Melbourne, my favorite city in Australia, to Hong Kong. May I now introduce Professor Devlin?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eugenia, and all colleagues here at Lingnan who've been very active with me over the last few months organising this day. I'm Marcia. Please call me Marcia, not Professor Devlin. I'm very informal. In Australia, we are very informal, so please don't feel that you need to be formal with me. It makes me a little bit nervous when people bow and call me Professor Devlin. So if my children were here, they would tell you I know nothing about anything, because I'm an idiot, as all mothers are to their children. And I really prefer that way of looking at me. So here we are. I was a big expert in plagiarism about 10 or 12 years ago, and really my research was all about that then. I haven't done a great deal of research directly about it since then, but I've kept up to date with what's happening in the field. So if you've read any of my publications, you'll find that they're from a decade or so ago. What I did when asked to do this workshop today was I had a look at those again in relation to the more recent research, and some of the principles are identical. They're exactly the same. So I feel confident in that regard that what I have to talk to you about today will be relevant to you. Now, I've forgotten to ask, there it is. Good, okay, here's the overview for today. And this is a workshop, so I'm not going to stand here and talk to you while you sit quietly and do your email. You're going to be doing some work, and you're going to be turning around, and you might be moving around the room, but you will actually be working. So if you don't want to do that, now would be a good time to leave, because I can see you all. I'll talk a little bit about the objectives, what my objectives are, and you might think about what your objectives are. And I might ask, just very quickly go around the room in a moment, and you tell me your first name, the university you're from, and really what you're looking for today, just so I can help tailor what we do. We're going to look at defining plagiarism. Of course, everyone in the room knows what it is, but what we'll find is very interesting because everyone has a slightly different understanding of what it is, and when we think about what that means for students, it's even more interesting. I'm here today to talk to you about the educative approach, so we'll do that, and in particular, policy preparation, positioning learning is the thing I'll talk about most today, and of course, punishment. Choosing strategies, and we'll use very old material from 2002, but what I'd like to do is to ask you to help me understand which of those things still apply and which are out of date. So you'll see when we get to that. And then some time for reflection at the end. Questions and answers, and answers, if you have them, are welcome all the way through. Please don't hesitate to ask. If I'm speaking too quickly, and I am, you can tell me to slow down, and I won't be able to, but I'll try my hardest, okay? I speak very quickly. So if you're really having trouble, please let me know. Just please slow down, Marcia, and I'll try my best. So, my objectives. To introduce you to this educative approach, and many of you won't need an introduction, but perhaps some of you won't have thought a lot about this approach before, and to provide some opportunities, and you'll have to take some away. We won't be able to fit in 3 weeks' work in an hour and a half, to how to implement this approach. So you need to think about your objectives and your challenges in your particular discipline, your particular role as a student, as a teacher educator, as a student educator, and what will apply to you. So one won't fix all. Some caveats before we start. Contexts make a difference. So this is a Hong Kong context, for example, not an Australian context where much of my work's been done. Each of you are in a different university, so that will make a difference. Each of you are in a different role, that will make a difference to what you take away, and so forth and so on. Plagiarism is very ill-defined. If you thought you were going to come here today and get the perfect definition, I'm sorry, you'll be disappointed. There is no such thing, and you'll find out more about that shortly. There is no definitive research on what works, because it depends on the context, it depends on the discipline, it depends on the level of the student, it depends on the reasons that students plagiarise, it depends on the extent of plagiarism. So it's all very unsatisfactory, but these are the caveats I need to share with you. There are no guarantees. I will share some suggestions with you today. I can't guarantee they'll work. In combination, they are likely to reduce or minimise plagiarism, but there is no surefire way. Some of your ideas will be challenged. If you have a very moral view of plagiarism, for example, and believe that it's about right and wrong, that idea will be challenged today, so be prepared for that, and I'm happy to have robust debate. So what I'm talking about really is a conceptually sound and intellectually rigorous evolving position around this educative approach to plagiarism. All right, let's get into it. What is plagiarism and what is not plagiarism? I would like you to turn to the first exercise in your papers. Everyone found that? Or finding it? Great. It says there you have 20 minutes. You don't. You have less than 10. I would like you to work in a group, and you can get yourselves into groups of about 3 or 4. Not pairs, please, more than 2. So you might have to turn around or move chairs. Please do that. And what I'd like you to do is to determine where plagiarism starts in this line. So number 1 is plagiarism. And number 6 is not, and most people, I think everyone would agree with that. Where do you cross the line? Where does plagiarism start? But wait, you have to work with your group to work it out, and then you have to give an individual presentation. And plagiarism will be severely penalised. Groups of 4, 3 or 4, group work, but an individual presentation. I'm going to ask one group to present. 3 of you have to present, or 4 of you, and you're not allowed to plagiarise from each other. Go. I confess I sped up the 10 minutes. It wasn't quite 10 minutes. Hands up if your group came to an agreement absolutely about where you crossed the line. 2 groups out of 9. So that's a really interesting finding. 3 groups out of the 9 groups came to an understanding and agreement about where you cross the line. So there's a finding for you. Some are still debating and arguing. Some are still talking. That's good. All right, so of the 3 groups who came to agreement, who thought the line was between 1 and 2? No one? 2 and 3? No one. 3 and 4? 2 and 3. Sorry, hands up again. They're having an argument. That's my point.
I can't remember that long ago.
All right, let's do it again. How many groups came to an agreement that the line was between 2 and 3? None. Between 3 and 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. Sort of. I'm not taking sort ofs. 4 and 5. 1. Sort of 2. You're all a bit confused. 5 and 6. All right, so we have significant disagreement across the room among experts of various kind, among a group who are all deeply interested in this topic. How on earth does a first-year student know what plagiarism is? How on earth? All right, I could just go home now because I've made my point. All right? If you take nothing else away from today and you stop listening now and start doing your email, that's fine, because you may go back to your office and think about this differently. When you think that students are evil tricksters who are out to trick you and get around you and cheat, think about this. No one in this room can agree what plagiarism is. And there is no right answer, actually. And when you talk about coding, it's quite different to when you talk about a history essay or an accounting assignment or whatever else students are doing. So it's very important that you remember what you've learnt today in this. I think I've said all that. There's no legal definition. It's not a legal issue. There are policies at universities, of course. They are open to interpretation and they're subjective. And they're interpreted by people who have personal views, including moral views. It's not a moral issue. It's often an issue of confusion and lack of clarity. And my favourite doing this exact exercise is when I have a group of accounting academics or IT academics, all from the same discipline, sometimes in offices next to each other. I have had two men stand up and bump their chests into each other and almost have a physical fight because they both felt so passionately about where the line was, and they had a disagreement, and their offices are next door to each other in the same department, in the same university. And I just said to them, please sit down. How do first-year students in your department have any idea what plagiarism is when you two can't agree? Later, the head of department said, oh, those two don't get on anyway. I said, well, that was obvious, but, the point still remains that it's very unclear. Communicating an unambiguous definition to students is therefore a very challenging thing to do, but it must be done. And again, if you take nothing else and you stop listening at this point, I've done my job and it's worth the travel over here, because if you go away and fix that, you will have taken a huge step towards minimising plagiarism. And there's a lot of nodding, including from my true expert colleague in the room. So, some students, and that's sort of putting it mildly, are likely to be confused about what to do and what not to do. They're under pressure. They've got 4 assignments due at the same time because we are terrible at organising academic calendars. We make everything due at the same time, squish everything into 12 weeks, do all kinds of ludicrous things. And it becomes even murkier with group work. Because of time constraints, I didn't get you to give your 1-minute presentation. But had I done that, you would have plagiarised from each other. Well, by the time we got to the 4th person, they would be saying ridiculous things in order to not plagiarise what their fellow students had already said. We use group work, let's be honest, because it saves us marking time. We all know that. Don't tell any students. You're not allowed to tell any students. My student colleague, okay? Shh. We have to kill him now. Oh, damn, I'm on tape. Oh, well, it's out there. We can cut that off. No, please don't, because it's actually a serious point. Academics do use group work to save marking time because academics are under pressure as well. I appreciate that. It's also useful to have people learn soft skills of working in groups, because when we go into real life, as we all know, you work with other people. So it is actually good training for life and work. But it's very murky, and I'll come to that in a moment. So think about what you learnt, and I might ask you at the end. I think I've stated some of what you've learned. You've been nodding while I've been talking, but what else did you learn from that activity? Now, this is the next thing I'd like to talk about, dimensions to keep in mind. When people think about plagiarism, they often think of criminal activity. They do. I've had people talk to me about it. Those students. I live with one of my sons is a university student at the moment, and his university has Turnitin, which I believe Lingnan has and other universities may have as well. In his case, he's able to put the assignment into Turnitin before he hands it in to see whether he might have inadvertently plagiarised. He finds it very interesting because he says it's very annoying. Turnitin shows up things that you've quoted, but that's okay because you can then see whether you've got a reference for it or not. If you haven't got a reference, you're in trouble. If you have got a reference, it's okay. But many academics and support staff I speak to do think of criminal activity. They think of students as these evil beings going about trying to cheat their way through university. I know those students exist, but I would say to you they're probably the minority. If a normal student becomes like that, it's because they're under pressure one way or another, financially, academically, personally, or a combination of those things, and they are forced to choose to do something they wouldn't normally do. It's not the case, in my professional opinion, that the world is full of people trying to commit criminal activity through plagiarism. So just consider this. There is an intent to cheat continuum from, I think this should be around the other way, and the next time I do this I'll flip it, starting on that side, using the work of others accidentally without acknowledgement, through to deliberately representing the work of others as your own, going to an essay mill and buying an essay. There is a website based in China, and I don't speak Chinese, I need to get some help, I think, that offers essays written by me for a fee. I don't write them, but a colleague pointed this out to me. You can find on the web that Professor Marcia Devlin will write your essay for you. So people do, that happens, we know. It happens in Australia a lot. They get closed down, they start up the next day under a different name. So that's this end of the continuum, where a student goes online and pays $50 or $100 or whatever I charge for my essays, and gets someone else to do their work. But there's the other end, where they might cross the line. They might be at 3 or 4 on the list that you looked at and not know that what they're doing is wrong, or might have a sense it's wrong but don't really know what to do about it. I think that's important. I don't think people who plagiarise different ways on that continuum should be treated the same way. And that's what the research shows. The special case of group work. I'll keep coming back to it. I'm sorry about the quality of this, but I wanted to cut and paste it rather than put a table in, because when you change from Apple to PC, sometimes the formatting goes, so it's a bit wobbly. So here's group work. Collaboration, which you all did, and then there's collusion, where you become slightly evil, and then there's copying, which is downright awful and you should go to jail. Beyond this point, and you'll see the arrow is somewhere in the middle between collaboration and collusion, maybe plagiarism, depends. And on the other side, somewhere in the middle there, definitely is plagiarism beyond a certain point. But where's the point? And how does the student know? First year, second year, third year, fourth year, postgraduate student, where do they know if they're doing group work in a postgraduate MBA, and I've done quite a bit of work in that space, how do they know what's okay and what's not? You know what happens in group work a lot is one person does most of the work. We see this all the time. And especially if there are members of the group who don't have good language skills in whatever language is being used for instruction, they do all the work and just give it to everybody else. They think they're doing a good turn. My younger son did that to help out the international students he was working with. I had to sit him down and explain to him that wasn't really helping the international students in the longer term. And what he was doing was a form of plagiarism. He was horrified. I was trying to be a nice person and develop my leadership skills and get the assignment done. And, you know, all seems really reasonable. But actually, he'd gone beyond collusion. And they had copied him and he had enabled that. So he was an enabler of plagiarism. We fixed it. He told me before he handed it in, thank goodness. But not everyone has an academic living in their house as their mother who's checking all the time what their children are up to. So, group work. Now we look at the extent. This is a little pussycat. If it bit you, it's pretty cute, probably wouldn't, just have a little bite, wouldn't really sink its teeth in. That one would eat you for dinner. The extent. So, again, I think this should be around the other way. One end is minor, misuse of quotes, paraphrasing or referencing conventions, and the exercise I gave you focused on that. The other is the essay mill, with their essay allegedly written by Professor Devlin. Extent of plagiarism. Again, I don't think those people should be treated the same way. If they forgot to put some quotation marks in, and let's face it, the conventions we use in academia around funny little marks, and is it one or two? Who knows? Brackets with names and dates and page numbers and footnotes and what's the difference and what, you know, is bizarre. It is a bizarre cultural practice that only happens in universities. How does a normal person, that is a person who hasn't been to university, coming into that bizarre world, understand what to do? There are things to learn, and here's where libraries are really important, and support staff, because it is a whole body of work, it is a whole way of thinking. The individual ownership of ideas is not a multicultural concept. In some cultures that is nonsense. Ideas do not belong to one person. In some cultures, using the ideas of other people is a sign of respect. And there's no need to put little funny marks, whatever they're for, and the brackety thing and the numbers. And it's all very confusing, quite genuinely, to quite a lot of people for quite a long time. So the extent of plagiarism is really important to take into account. So, if you put those things together, how might you respond then to plagiarism? This is my favourite graph. So, starting in the bottom left, I can't do back to front, this one, if the extent is minor and it's entirely accidental, of course you don't ignore that, but you'd focus on re-educating and explaining the expectations and teaching the skills of how to reference, for example. Moving across then to number 2, if it's extreme, but it's entirely accidental, it's likely a significant misunderstanding, so you'd need to renew education on expectations. Going up to the top on this side, if it's entirely deliberate but it's minor, it's still unacceptable, even if it's minor. However, you would still focus on education rather than punishment, surely. Primarily. I'm not saying you wouldn't punish a student who deliberately plagiarises, but you would focus on explaining why it's important. That's the other thing. Students don't really understand why it's a big deal. Why is it a big deal to help my friend? It's actually a nice thing to do in real life, not university life. And then in the top right-hand corner, if it's entirely deliberate, it's extreme, you've downloaded allegedly Professor Devlin's essay and paid $50, then it is a serious and inexcusable breach, and that is a punishment, I think. So my argument would be in those 4 quadrants, and I've simplified things because there's a whole continuum in between these things, that would be where you would go to punishment. That would be where it goes to a committee and there's a demerit points or exclusion if it's a repeated offence, etc., etc. Now, I'm getting to sound like the sound of my own voice. Comments or questions from you so far? You're all just mesmerised and agreeing with everything. There are a lot of heads nodding, so that's encouraging. But I'm probably preaching to the converted. But the converted need preaching too, so that's okay. So we can go out and we can evangelise and we can convert our colleagues. All right. Yes?
In fact, I have used this graph a number of times to share with my colleagues, but I just would like to add one thing to the upper right-hand corner.
Yes.
Instead of just penalize quickly and appropriately, I think the education is very important. We need to educate our students more. I mean, particularly for that group of students.
Okay, great.
Just the other 3 all have education element, but this group.
We shouldn't leave them out. All right, thank you very much. I'll make a note of that. This does need updated, I know, so thank you. Great. So what to do? The punitive approach, the educative approach. Here's the police arriving because somebody's forgot to put 2 quotation marks at the end of the quote. Sometimes in some universities it's actually, never mind the police, bring in the army and bring the riot gear in, and the helicopters, because this is so serious. Honestly, there are people who I talk to, it's very hard to talk to them because they have this approach. If someone has plagiarised, that's it. Is catch and punish working? So I said to you at the beginning, I haven't done a lot of deep work in this area for over a decade. What I see is that plagiarism seems to be increasing rather than decreasing with the advent of the internet and societal norms shifting, sharing files, sharing all kinds of things online. So I guess my suggestion is an educative approach may be more effective. So let's move on to those 4 areas now that I wanted to talk to you about. In Australia, and this is the work I did a decade or so ago, we did a national study in this area, a very in-depth study, and we came up with this recommendation. Now, this is still used in Australia because every year I get royalties for the work that I produced in this area, and I get a lot of money, which means a lot of people are copying it and using it still all this time later. And this is where I was talking about where I haven't done recent in-depth research, but the principles still apply. So here they are, the 4-part strategy, a collaborative effort to counter plagiarism at every level, from Deputy Vice-Chancellor in charge of education down to whatever you go down to, whatever your hierarchy is, at every level. Students through all levels to higher management. Thoroughly educating students about the expected conventions for authorship. That doesn't mean telling them not to plagiarise, because those words don't plagiarise mean nothing to a person who's not inculcated into the cultural practices of university. So educating is quite different from telling. Designing approaches to assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit about assessment that maximise learning and minimise the possibility for students to submit plagiarised material. It is always about minimisation, not eradication. I understand that, but we should do our best. And then installing highly visible procedures for monitoring and detecting, including appropriate punishment and re-education. So to your point before about always having education in there. So that is the approach that's been used in Australia. It is similar to what's been used in the UK, because a lot of the work that we did was based on the UK, but quite different from what's being used in the US. The US tends to have a more moral approach to it. And I'm not sure why that is, but the introduction of honour codes, getting students to sign things to declare that the work's their own. If a student's plagiarised and they don't know that they've plagiarised, they will sign that, quite honestly, that form saying it's all my own work, because it is. They found the thing on the internet, they downloaded it, they copied it into their essay, they did it all themselves. So sign away. I signed those things all through undergraduate, no idea what I was signing, but I couldn't submit the assignment till I'd signed it. So that was, I've got to get this assignment in, where do I sign? Great, and those days it was paper, you left it in a box outside the lecturer's office. Other people came, took your essays, copied them, put their essay in, all kinds of stuff happened. We didn't know about that. So yes, this is what's happening in Australia and the UK. So moving on to the 4, I'm going to quickly talk about 1, 2 and 4 and talk a little bit more about positioning learning. Julie, who's not here today but who I worked with to prepare this workshop, and I had a funny time coming up with this because that wasn't what I had in there originally, but I wanted all of them to start with P so that you could remember them. So this isn't what I would have called it originally, but there you go. All right, so policy. Very easy for me to say, very hard to do in practice. It has to be defined unambiguously in language that the students can understand. When you get into academia, you start speaking and writing in a different way to the way you do in your normal life. And you know, some of you might have noticed family members saying to you when you first start doing it, why are you talking like that? Or you're not at work now. Then your family members get used to it, or they might be in the same world as you and your friends are all in the same world as you. And so you think that the way that we speak is normal, and the way that we speak is not normal. It's peculiar to universities and university speak, and to people who work and live and study in universities. And normal people don't speak like us. So when we write policies, they're written in academic ease, like Chinese or English. It's incomprehensible to a normal person who doesn't understand the language yet. So it's actually the unambiguous bit, again, easy for me to say, hard to do. When I worked at Swinburne University years ago, I wrote a student-friendly guide. It was really one of the most challenging things I've ever done because I wasn't able to write the way I normally write. And I had to keep remembering my audience was an inculcated student, not a colleague. I wasn't trying to impress my colleagues with my fancy writing and my incomprehensible sentences. I was actually trying to do the opposite. And that's what we need to do with policy. Very hard to do, but easy for me to say. Sometimes it's about amending a policy that's in there and rewriting it in English or whatever the language is that you're instructing in. And I mean everyday English, not academic English. Very important. If you can make little tweaks to something you already have, that can be enormously powerful. The student actually gets it. The definition needs to include something about group work and working with others. In English, precisely, at what point does collaboration become collusion? At what point does collusion become copying? What is acceptable and what is not? Using, and I haven't got them today, but checklists where you say this is okay, this is not okay. And sometimes it's a matter of having all the options there and you tick the ones that are okay or not okay. Is intent necessary? How do you know? What about extent? So sometimes it is required that the student meant to plagiarise in order for the policy to be enacted, most often not, but it's important to think about. Preparation.
I think all of our universities have policies, and you just mentioned how we should have to write it in a language that students understand and be precise. But you just ran the exercise just now, even with a random group, you don't have people that can come to a common understanding. Now, university is a great place of common understanding. Everybody has an opinion. Having that policy, everyone has it, and it's sort of set there, set in stone. Nobody really wants to challenge it, but to actually rewrite it friendly language, and it's of course, as you said, academic ease. Rewrite it in friendly languages, making clear what is the line. When I look at it, I just thought, wow, I don't think it will go through Senate. It would have such a debate in Senate.
But what a great debate, yeah. So good point, Eva. I mean, it is. And universities are full of people with opinions, and those opinions rarely agree with each other fully, and that's what the exercise is about. You know this, you live this every day. One response to that is to write a student-friendly guide that goes alongside the policy. So the guide's written in English. Sometimes you still need to get approval for that. Sometimes you can do it and not tell anyone. Just slip it to the students. And you're nodding. So did you want to add something?
I just want to say maybe just attach a guidebook for the students.
Yep. Which translates the language that suits the Senate. And sometimes I think, not your university or any universities represented in this room or my university, but other evil universities, the Senate do things that suit the Senate and sometimes forget that the main existence for a university is to create and disseminate knowledge to students. So they need to understand. If you really want to help them, they have to understand. But I take your point. It is yeah, might not get through Senate, so find another way.
We're not changing the policy, but rewriting it.
Yeah.
Student-friendly.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what we have to do.
Sometimes, though, Eva, with the policy, you do have to work hard, and I think there are some universities here in Hong Kong who are trying to actually change the policy because the policy is based on some principles and assumptions that are misguided. For example, that plagiarism is a moral issue, full stop, because it's not just a moral issue. So if you have a policy like that, it is very difficult because even translating it for the students doesn't help that much. So, yeah, but good point, thank you. So preparation, and many of you are involved in this sort of thing. University entry requirements. Now, I didn't hear anyone say anything specifically about that in their introduction, but language test score policy and the application of that policy, IELTS and similar scores if the instruction is in English. Sometimes administrators and certainly administrative teams I've worked on at senior level have been guilty of this, where you want more students and so you lower the entry barrier to enable more students to come in, but actually you're setting some students up for failure because they don't have the requisite language skills. So, we'll just get them some help from language and learning advisors. Yeah, that doesn't really work. It does, it helps, of course it does, but sometimes there is a fundamental level of language that's required before students come in. Orientation and transition programs, and some of you mentioned you're involved in those, so important. Training programs, and these things overlap, of course. In research skills, how do you find the sources? How do you do that? I remember I went back to study, I've got 5 years, and when I went back to do my PhD, which was my 5th one, I'd had a break of about 4 or 5 years between my masters. I had children in that space and my PhD, and I had to go into the library and relearn how to use it. Plus the technology had all changed. There was all this new Scopus this and bloody that, and I just wanted to find a journal article and I didn't know how to do it anymore. When I did my undergraduate, they were in books. You went in and got them, all the old people, same age as me, people at the front, you're kneeling on the floor, taking the big tomes down, actually looking through it. Now it's just all by the computer. I didn't really go into the library apart from that first day of my PhD. That's quite different. And again, for students coming in, if they haven't done that before, or they've done it in a different way at school, how do you know how to research? Those research skills are critical. In the mechanics of referencing, those quotation marks. I had a colleague who came, we say in Australia, came a cropper, because she used a single inverted comma instead of a double. She actually had to move university. She was doing a PhD at the time because she fell out so badly. It was a very complicated thing. Non-English speaking background, and had made a simple mistake in the number of quotations, so it looked like she was putting something in one quotation mark to emphasise it when in fact she thought she was quoting it. Little things like that. And of course writing, which is a very complex thing in any language. Language and academic skills services, workshops, one-to-one appointments, etc. And resources. I do think they're very valuable and very cost-effective. If you can write a student-friendly guide, and the one I did at Swinburne, which is available online freely and you're welcome to use it, and you're welcome, it says copyright on it, but you could download that and just change Swinburne University to Hong Kong Baptist University. I give you permission. So it's on record now. Are you allowed to do that? I own the copyright, so... And Swinburne tried to get me to give it to them and I forgot. So I've still got the copyright. So please, it's there. Delete bits that don't work, add in other bits. It might need updated. It's from 2005, I think. Devlin, Swinburne, Plagiarism Student Guide, it's there. I mean that quite seriously because I spent a year on that. So there's a lot of... Yeah. Or just put an acknowledgement in that says, based on the work of or something. I don't care at this point in my career. Take it. No, don't. Of course, don't plagiarise. Do the right thing. Of course, Cecilia. Thank you. Yes. There is other stuff out there. It's probably better than mine. I haven't looked for a long time, but I did the best work I could in 2005. But there'll be other things there that are probably better, maybe even written more clearly, shorter, in online version, because students like things they can click, etc. Now, just keeping an eye on the time. Positioning learning. So we're here to teach. Students are here to learn. It's very simple. I think we have to remember that when we're talking about plagiarism. So here's some suggestions. Communicating the definitions. I'm repeating myself, but I'm doing it deliberately. Educate the students, different from telling them. Support them. Education, training, workshops, resources, ongoing help. And design assessment. And this is what we're going to move on to next. So that the opportunities for plagiarism are minimised. I'm not going to go through the communication, etc. I'm going to jump straight to, these will all be in the slides, designing carefully. So I did some research, again, a long time ago, and asked some students why they plagiarised or why they thought other students plagiarised. And these are some of the quotes. This is where we do get to the evil students and the moral in some cases. It's easier to plagiarise than doing the work on your own. That's true. No one could argue with that. It's easier than trying to find books, find the information, rewrite it. You just copy. Simple. What's the problem? Plagiarism is very convenient. And the final one is the one I really wanted to focus on. There are not enough obstructions, repellents to plagiarising. It's so easy. Well, aren't we a bunch of idiots for making it so easy? We shouldn't make it easy. We should make it difficult to plagiarise. And some disciplines, and coding in IT is a particularly tricky one, but it's not impossible to make it harder. Okay? So, let's move on to activity 2. And what you'll need for that is the instructions, which are in your pack, and also the guide, which is in your pack. So the guide, I'll show you first, is from the Centre for the Study of Higher Education, where I worked for a long time at the University of Melbourne, and it looks like that, Minimising Plagiarism. And you're going to start on page 9 of that. So if you can find page 9, and it starts with number 1 at the top, and it's got a box in the middle. So the activity is this. These are very out of date. This was written in 2001, 2002. So ignore what doesn't apply, and there's some things in there that are quite funny, you know, where you'd go to see what's the latest in plagiarism, for example. You might want to start at number 1, you might want to start at number 36. There are 36 suggestions for minimising plagiarism. What I'd like you to do is work in pairs or small groups, whichever you prefer. Don't work on your own, work with someone else, it's more valuable. And see which you think of these are applicable in your context and why. Now here's a very valuable sharing exercise. When you determine why, you pick one out, you can share it with the rest of the group, they'll learn something from that. So it'll be good for you and good for them as well. And think about how you would set up the strategy so it's operational. It's all very well conceptually and on paper to say, oh, I'd, individually meet with each of my students and discuss for an hour. Well, if you've got 500 students, that's ridiculous. So pick something that will work and think about how you'd operationalise it. Let's spend 10 minutes on that. Yep. You don't have to do them all. Everyone's panicking. It's not a test. Just have a quick look. It's only 36. Some of you start at 36 and work backwards, so we've got a bit of a variety, and we'll see where we're at in 10 minutes. There's no test. Okay, let's come back together and see what we have determined might work in our context and why. Any volunteers to go first with a strategy they think they like the look of and some ideas about how they might implement? And we have microphones. I think that's to make sure that things get onto the... No pressure, but you're going to be on the World Wide Web. Volunteer, because I can volunteer people, I just pick them. I've got the microphone and I'm up the front, so... Yes.
The point I've just made to my colleagues is
Yes.
that when you're designing your assessments, I don't think the problem of plagiarism should be the priority. Your assessment should be to find out whether the learning objectives have been met.
Of course.
Rather, that's the main priority.
Of course.
So we've got to put plagiarism in its place.
Of course, good point, thank you. So maybe there are ways to both assess the learning objectives, whether they've been met or to what extent they've been met, and minimise plagiarism. Very good point, thank you. Can we have the microphone back to Mark?
I'm usually louder, but...
Thank you.
And I follow up on Richard's idea about assessment, because sometimes the idea of assessment to sort of give this, I guess, formative versus summative assessment. And so sometimes you want them to do formative assessment to find out where they are. And at that case, formative assessment is meaningless if they're just cutting and pasting.
Yes,
So I liked the one about number 1, where we need to create a climate of involvement and interest so that students actually understand why we have these assignments, why we're worried about them.
Yes.
Are we valuing ideas? Are we evaluating their opinion?
Yes.
And it's going to be different from assignment to assignment. So I don't think I do a very good job of setting a bigger context of why this is important, and that's been very helpful for me thinking about how to do it going forward.
Great. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Someone else? Someone at the back on this side? Everyone looks at the floor. Didn't like any of them.
I personally like all of them.
Yep.
It all depends on what we discuss is because it is a very interesting group. We have a student here and then the others are teachers. So it depends on who we are
Yes.
and also which subject we
Of
are
course.
teaching.
Yes, context. Yes.
Yeah, context, discipline, and for example, we are English language teachers, and so when it comes to like strategy 3, 4, 5, 6, that's what we have been teaching.
Yes.
Teaching students how to do summarizing, paraphrasing.
Yes.
Some that I like, for example, having in class essay writing so that they have no chance to plagiarize at all.
Yes.
But then when I like this idea, but when it comes back to the whole panel, the other colleagues may not be too into these ideas.
course,
so we have
but there's
to go
no
through a
right
lot
or
of,
wrong. Yes, yes,
discussion,
yes.
administration, a lot of realistic concern. So
Yes.
that is what we come up with.
Great, thank you. And can I ask the student, sorry to put you on the spot, did you have any particular view? Did you think from a student point of view any of these would be more helpful or less helpful?
I think plagiarism should be taught at the very beginning of the student enrollment into
Yes.
university. And I also find the number 3 and number 4 suggestions are particularly important from a student point of view.
Teaching those
teach
skills.
the skills of summarizing, paraphrasing, especially like in my discipline, I'm majoring in humanities, and sometimes I may repeat unconsciously
Yes.
the ideas of the previous scholars or
Yes.
some so-called facts without any consciousness that I
Yes.
am already plagiarizing. And so I think for students, they may develop this kind of awareness at the
Yes.
very beginning. And also the fourth point, teach the skills of critical analysis and building an argument. Because I think that this is the normal practice for students to write the thesis, and how to weave different arguments from different authors together
Yes.
without any traces of plagiarism.
Yes.
May be an important skill for students.
Thank you so much. It's very powerful to hear it from a student. Yes, those skills of summarising, paraphrasing, critical analysis, building an argument, you don't wake up in the morning and go, now I've realised how to do it. I've dreamt about it. Now I know. It's not like a normal developmental experience thing in life. It is something that has to be specifically taught. So thank you very much. Thank you. Others? What others? I'm particularly interested in the ones from number 7 to number 20, which are specifically about countering plagiarism through the design of assessment. Did anyone pick one in that group that they liked? Yes? Angel, could we have a microphone here, please? Yes.
Yeah. When we picking the assignment to counter the plagiarism, we agreed that the assignment instead to be a bit too informative, but focus on students' critical thinking and reflection.
Yes.
That plagiarism can be minimized or avoided, since they have to have their own thinking.
About the facts and the information.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
good. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Others? What about our experts at the front? Would you like to share? You don't get away with sitting there. Come on. Eugenia will have a go. Thank you.
Maybe I will just speak on behalf of the group. Actually, we pick about asking students for evidence that they have not plagiarized.
What number is that,
Which
Eugenia?
is 21, started to
21.
21, page 10.
Yes, so that's
we
section.
talk from 21 to 24 only, because we find it was just quite difficult to make it a policy, and also it would be a lot of effort for the student as well as for the teachers to do.
You mean 25 and 26 would be?
Yeah, actually from 21 to 24, it is all quite difficult, although
that's
they
difficult.
are
Yep.
suggestions for asking for evidences because we think that really it's too much work, and also we don't really know if they actually read this. They should just get the photocopy from somewhere or screen dump from somewhere, you know, because they have to submit it with the assignment,
Yes.
so it doesn't work that
Won't work,
well.
yep.
Yeah, and even they submit to you, maybe actually the article has nothing to do with what is related to the essay. So
Yes,
it would be
unless
very,
you check, that's right.
Yeah, unless you have really, you know the article or you have read it before, or you have to read it to make sure really we think is not our
That will
teacher's
create more work. Yes, of
yeah.
course, yeah.
So maybe other member would like to.
Yeah, if I could just add something to that. Paul made the very good point, which I think very much resonates with what you were saying before, that a lot of these things would require students to do more work, and it would require students who want to cheat to do a little bit more work, and that might be a deterrent. But it would also require additional, sometimes meaningless work of the students who don't intend to cheat, so that
would not be a good strategy.
somehow punishing the many for the sake of the few. So I guess I wanted to connect that with what you said, because it seems to be another instance of prioritizing preventing plagiarism over designing assessments that actually
Do what
measure
they're
whether
supposed
students
to
have
do.
achieved
Yeah.
the intended learning outcomes.
Good. So you can see the academics in the room. They're telling us what's wrong with these strategies, which is great. The exercise was to find one that might help. This always happens. Thank you. Just wait for the microphone, Eva, just for the recording. Cecilia, sorry.
I know you actually asked us to find one, but when I look at the list, I actually thought that all these are very good individually, but probably to be effective, they should be put together just like your strategy. You have a 4-step strategy. So this one would actually be a group of people who in the university are really in charge of, or they are actually would work out the strategy, because we were also talking that if 4 teachers here, we'll all pick the ones that we like, and then we actually do the different things. It's just add a lot of work to the students,
yes.
because it's actually happened
It's
to
a
the
good
one
point.
group of students that
Yes.
we teach, and yet maybe the effect is not coherent. They
Yes.
just say, oh, Eva wants that, and then Richard wants that, you know, so type of thing.
Yes,
So,
typical Eva, Richard, yes.
So the coherentness
Yes.
and the strategy, that's why I like
The full part,
yeah,
great, thank you. One more.
Right. So I actually agree with Mark. So we were actually from the same unit, and we were on more likely like a science context. So somehow it is hard to avoid students referring to cases, referring to some of the science facts and so forth. So number one is definitely something that would be, to me, I would sounds like more ideal at this stage. But I personally, I did actually take, for example, like from 32, 33 and so forth. This is something what I am doing at this stage, and then sometimes I am actually struggling about. So even though I sort of find out that students sounds like he's kind of plagiarizing, I know he's trying to rewrite it, but but somehow I'm actually struggling about. It's like sometimes should I be encouraging them, or as you said, they might actually plagiarizing in an unconscious way that because some of them they were only like year 1, year 2, so. How do I actually trying to like being encouraging, or is like in terms of a penalty way? So you shouldn't do it next time. If you've got 10 marks deducted, if you've got the assignments disqualified, of course they will learn something. But which way is a more effective or a more encouraging?
Do you remember my caveats at the beginning? I can't answer that question for you because I'm not your discipline expert and I don't know your students. But I would ask you to think learning is at the centre of this. If you punish them, cancel the assignment, they will learn something. But what will they learn? Will they learn how not to do it again? Not necessarily. They'll learn that what they did was very bad. Will they understand what they did, why it was bad, how to avoid doing it again? So you just need to think very carefully about the learning and positioning learning being the most important thing here. But I can't answer your question. I'm sorry, it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's for you to think about.
Answers to it. So number one is definitely something
You like that?
that's like
Great.
I'm keen on it. Ideally, in the science unit, we would be able to implement that.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Next door, would you like to say something that next to you? No? You'll be our last one.
The case would be would be a practical problem in Hong Kong because English language is a problem. That's why they don't want to plagiarize sometimes because they don't know how to write it.
Yes.
That is the practical
reality.
exercise
Yes.
in Hong Kong.
Yes.
That's why sometimes just like I do agree. The objective of the assignment. You want them to learn.
Yes.
Or and that is the things, I just want to know something about how to minimize.
Yes.
That is, the purpose,
Yeah.
So sometimes, in reality, I will ask the student, think in Chinese first.
Yes.
And then try to understand the content of the article. And then think in Chinese, or in their mother language.
Mm-hmm.
And then try to write in English.
Yeah.
In his own words.
Because you think that might help their learning.
Yeah.
Great.
That is,
Great, thank you. All right, thank you very much. We'll move on. And what I would really like to make a point about is assessment. And you've raised a very good point, Richard and others, about what is the purpose of assessment. So I want to point out something to you that you already know, but most people find very interesting to have represented back to them. This is how many academic staff, probably not a lot of people in this room, but many academic staff see things this way. The first thing they think about is what is the course content? What do they need to cover? Okay, then what are my teaching objectives? Really, they might not use that language, but how will I get this content across best in class? What reading shall I prescribe? What subtopic should I cover? How much time should I spend on the subtopic, etc.? And then finally, how will I assess student learning? Shall I do an exam, an assignment? How much will the assignment be worth? Will I do a group, individual? Group will help me marking time. That's probably good. Assessment can be, often is, in my experience, the final consideration. Here's how many students, I'd say most students, see things. First thing they do is turn to the assessment. How am I going to be assessed? When's the assignment due? How much is the exam worth? Oh my goodness, all my assignments are due in the same week. Oh, how am I going to cope? I'm going to have a breakdown. That's what my sons do anyway. Then what are my learning objectives? Many students wouldn't use that language, but how would I get the best mark, or how do I pass? Some students are aiming for the pass, some are aiming for the high distinction. Should I use this great website where Professor Marcia Devlin will write my essay for me for just $50 and cut and paste, or should I do some work? How am I going to meet my learning objectives, which are get through this course and get out of here and get a good job, or really deeply learn and understand and appreciate and become my lecturer, because I always want to be an academic and that is my life, to study, be a scientist, so that most students are on a continuum between get through this boring 3 years and dedicate my life to become my professor. And you could argue about where they are, and depending on the university and the group you have. And then the last thing, what content do I need to know? Should I go to this class? It's very early in the morning. I'm very tired. It's hard for me to get up. I'm only 18. Teenagers like to sleep in late. I'll just get my friend's essay from last year. They've offered it to me. They're being a good friend. And I can copy that, just change a few words and hand that in, and Bob's your uncle. So assessment is often the first consideration. So when you put those two things together, you'll see there's a polar opposite view of where assessment sits in the hierarchy. And you all know this, you're all nodding. But I find that we forget this all the time. We forget this, and we tend to focus on the content and the teaching and me and what shall I wear, and here I am at the microphone and I sound great and I'm an expert and everybody's nodding and I'm just all fabulous. Students don't care anything about that. They just want to know about the assessment. That's not a bad thing. The assessment, I would ask this question, are we making enough of this strategic knowledge about how students see assessment to meet the learning objectives? And my job today is to talk about minimising plagiarism. Are we using our knowledge of how students think about assessment to the maximum benefit? I don't think we always are. So that is something for you to think about. Assessment it defines the curriculum for students. It is where the learning takes place. They don't often learn things sitting in a large lecture theatre. they often learn things through the assessment, talking about the assessment, thinking about the assessment, researching for the assessment, writing for the assessment. We're nearing the end. I can see you're getting tired. This is a bit of fun. There's a third activity in your pack. It's a very short one, and it's just to take a quiz. So this is really designed for academic staff. So those of you who aren't academic staff, go along with it. But this would be a suggestion for what you might do when you're designing a subject and using it with your students. So just take a pen and tick. It's a quiz like you get in the women's magazines, and then you see whether you're, likely to have romance, not have romance, whatever those things talk about. I've stopped reading them. I haven't, that's a lie. I don't do the quizzes anymore. We all need downtime, Eva. We all need downtime. What about 4 to 6? Very good. Excellent. And what about 0 to 3? Oh dear. Okay, some work to do. It just was a bit of fun, just very, very quickly. Number 3 is an interesting one. When I was a student, one of my courses, a lecturer wrote to me and said that my assignment was so good. It was a pro forma, but, personally signed by the lecturer when I got my assignment back. My assignment was so good, could they please use it as an exemplar for other students of how to get a high distinction? So, of course, I said yes. I was so pleased and so proud. And so, my assignment was then shown to people as an example. So that's a very, very powerful way to do it, and it works in a discipline, discipline context, because what is a good assignment in science is different from accounting, is different from IT, is different from English language, etc. So that's one I would recommend you think about. And it's usually received very well by the students. Obviously, you need to explain to the new students that they mustn't plagiarise the essay or the assignment. They must use it as a model for how to structure, etc. All right, just let's move on. I did want to say something about punishment, because I thought there may be some people in the room who have views that should still be a part. I agree, but I think you have to advertise early and often that people will be punished and what for, and of course all the other things are in place. Catch deliberate plagiarists, and I think there's a question about enablers, like my son who enabled the group to plagiarise. He didn't know that's what he was doing. He didn't mean to do that. He thought he was doing the opposite, which was helping. What do you do about the people who are the culprits, who provide the work for others to copy in group work, etc.? Follow-through is critical. It's a bit like parenting. You can't say you're going to get into trouble and then they don't get into trouble, because they learn very quickly that you're just talking and you're not doing anything. And I think making punishments a deterrent. Resubmission of the same work as an assignment is an extension. If you get people to resubmit the same work that they've plagiarised in, you're just giving them more time to do the work. Students work that out. Don't do that. Give them a different assignment with their critical reflection and their own opinion about something, or relate it to their own experience or something where they can't it's harder to plagiarise. Reduced marks or failing an assignment, if the student can still pass or still get a high mark, is not deterring. So you've got to think about that. Take a point off, so what? Still got a distinction average, or I still passed, I don't care about that point. 5 minutes. And include educative strategies always. So I think some of the challenges, focusing on quick fix and avoiding bad PR and media. No university wants to be known to have a large number of plagiarists. This happens every now and in Australia. I don't know if it happens in Hong Kong, where a particular university is caught. The students are using an essay mill. All students from all universities use them. But, the essay mill is caught and closed down by the regulatory body, and they find out that's University X, many students from that university. Well, of course, what happens is some students at that university start using it, and then they tell all their friends, and they tell all their friends, and everyone's using it. It doesn't mean that university is a bad university. So I know that some of these things you have to be careful. There is resistance from overworked academics, and I absolutely appreciate that. The role has changed. It is much busier. It is much harder than it used to be. There are many more students. Many of the students are not prepared in the same way that students were when only 5% of people went to university. So that is a thing, and you need time. What we really need, and I'm so pleased that some people are still doing research in this area, I'm not, is robust evaluation, quantitative and qualitative. There are limitations in this research of self-report, response rates. Have you ever cheated? Have you ever cheated on your partner? What's everyone going to say? No! 60% of people have, apparently, in some studies, in women's magazines that I've read about. They're probably not that reliable, those studies. The number of cases may increase initially. you know, in that if you have better reporting, it's like anything where you start to take a stand with something. Yeah, so there's more promise with qualitative data, but it's very resource intensive, having done some research. So where to start? I'd say start somewhere. The temptation to ignore can be very strong. Start small. Try one strategy. I know the academics didn't like any of them, but maybe there's one in there you could give a whirl to, and trial it. And start where success is most likely. What's most appropriate in your context? It may not fit with someone else's. So can I ask you if anyone was willing to share, to think about that? What have you learnt? What, if anything, will you do differently? And what's the first step? And open to questions and discussion generally as well. They're just suggestions for how we might round off the last 3 minutes. Then we've got a short break before the panel. So, yes, thank you. Just wait for the microphone so it's on the record.
And you have talked about deliberate plagiarism, and I'm wondering what if the students carelessly plagiarize, and what is the role of student responsibility? How much time do we give them to learn how to avoid plagiarism? So if they're told all the mechanics, and if they're told all the definitions, do they need to hold up to their own responsibility?
Yes, very, very good point. And of course, it's a rhetorical question in some ways. Of course, students need to take responsibility, but how would you know whether they've been careless or deliberate? You know, so it's, yeah, it is a shared responsibility, no doubt about that. And as I said at the beginning, there will be students always who deliberately cheat and then lie, because cheating and lying go together. Have you cheated on your partner? No. Did you deliberately do this? No, it was an accident. I didn't realise. Of course, but I hope that would be a minority when you put strategies in place like we've talked about today. But it's a very good point. Students are not passive. They have agency. If they are taught the skills and they're careless, you know, what do you do? It's very tricky. Very tricky. Other thoughts, reflections, questions, comments? It's time for a break soon, I think, Eugenia. Everyone's flagging. Well, that's what we want to see. Happy students who've graduated and who haven't plagiarised, or if they have, they've got away with it. No, I didn't say that. Who haven't plagiarised and have learnt. Are there any other final comments before we... Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. You were very engaged and contributed, and that was very good, because sometimes audiences aren't like that. So this was very enjoyable for me. So thank you very much.